Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents We Don't Swim Here by Vincent Tirado, narrated by Iikane.
Chapter 1. Bronwyn. I stared up at the two-story house, dim blue and faded with age, with a vague sense of dread. It looked large enough to swallow me whole, and mean enough to consider the attempt if the thick surrounding woods didn't get to me first. Dad was still unloading the U-Haul, with the hired movers grunting as they hoisted my wardrobe. Mom went inside with the suitcase. The sky was gray with cracks of blue, where the clouds didn't overlap. The light that shone through gave them a bright silver lining. Which was ironic. There was no silver lining here. We had just moved from Bronwyn, Illinois, back to my dad's hometown in Arkansas. Away from all my friends, my competitive swim team, and the intense schedule that kept me on track to one day become an Olympic swimmer. The reason made the situation more dismal. Lala had a stroke 6 months ago and was in hospice. The news was a shock. Uncle Nathan, who lived in town, had kept the first stroke a secret from Dad. Mom said it was so Dad wouldn't worry, but Dad didn't see it that way. And the way they stayed up late at night, having hushed conversations that bordered on arguments, I wasn't sure if that was the full story. It seemed like there was more under the surface, like a closed wound that was still suffering from an infection. Dad visited a few times, but when it was clear that Lala was not getting better, the decision was made. We would come to make the most of whatever time we had left with her, and Dad would help get her affairs in order. It was only 1 year, but that didn't make the situation any less shitty.
Bronwyn, help your mother take in what you can, okay?
Dad said.
Oscar, Jerome, and I will bring in all the heavier stuff.
I glanced at the U-Haul. It was small, and for good reason. The only heavy items were my bed and a wardrobe for the room I'd be staying in. We didn't need much. Lala's furniture and her whole life were here, so we could use what she had instead of dragging all of our stuff here and back. Sure, Dad? I smiled and grabbed the nearest cardboard box. I managed to hold my smile until his back was to me. The window panes had cracks, and tufts of grass poked out of the stone steps that led to the porch. Back in Bronwyn, we lived in a similar two-story house, and sure, ours was worn in a way that told you people lived there. But this house, Lala's place, felt less like a lived-in residence and more like it was inhabited by ghosts. The surrounding woods only added to that feeling. This place was rural, in the middle of nowhere. Back home, we had neighbors and sidewalks. I could go for a walk without the fear of coming face to face with bears or other wild animals. Now it was looking like I'd taken that safety for granted. Inside Lala's house, the hallway was long and narrow, flowing straight to what looked like the kitchen, with the living room on one side and a staircase on the other. The sound of cabinets opening and glass clinking told me Mom was checking things out. I couldn't remember the last time she visited. It was probably when I had, several years ago. Dad did his best to keep the house well cleaned while he visited, but, well, I wouldn't be surprised if he let that slip. Grief does that. I put the box down in a corner and decided to take a quick look around. The floors creaked under me like a warning. I started toward the kitchen when gravity pulled me down suddenly. I grabbed onto the banister. I pulled myself up and stared down. The thin rug with tassels slid on the floor easily and had nearly taken me out before I was 10 steps into the house. Christ, I hissed under my breath. It was hard enough feeling like the entire world was against me, but now it felt like the house was trying to say I wasn't welcome. I rolled up the rug and shoved it to the side. There was no reason to leave a tripping hazard out when there was about to be a dozen more boxes to bring inside. I took a cautious step forward, then my feet moved without me thinking about where to go. I'd been to Lala's house before. I was too young to remember exactly when, but bits and pieces were coming back. Soft giggles vibrating off walls as my little legs ran up the stairs. The smell of pancakes, bacon, and eggs in the morning before I opened my eyes. The time she tried to get me to pronounce abuela correctly, but I couldn't, so she became Lala to me. Still was, I guessed. It had been a while since I'd seen Lala, but I remembered the smell of her lotion and feel of her arms around me. Thick and secure. A loving warmth. I continued forward, simultaneously going on a curious tour of the house and down memory lane. I suddenly remembered where the bathrooms were, the look of the sand-colored cabinets and white laminate countertops in the kitchen. I came to the kitchen at the end of the hallway. "You okay, Winnie?" Mom asked. "Yeah, I'm fine." I fanned myself with my hands. "It's really humid in here." "Yeah, I noticed," she said, looking around with vague distaste. Mom was trying to keep the peace, but I could tell she wasn't fond of the move either. Like me, she had a whole life back in Illinois. Friends she had brunch with on Sunday mornings. Work? Sure, her job was remote, and she could work anywhere. But internet access didn't exactly make a house a home. We were both out of our element. Mom's thick curls were tied back with a silk ribbon, framing her heart-shaped face and wide eyes that observed everything. I was told that I took after her that way. Always watching and trying to make sense of things. "And why don't you open a few more windows? Hopefully it'll get a nice breeze flowing." Without another word, she turned on her heels and went down the hall. Then she called out, "Winnie, do me a favor and grab the paper towels by the window, too. I don't know why your father lets it get so dusty in here," she tissed. Turning toward the kitchen counter, I unrolled a few sheets of towels. When I tore the perforation, dust particles blew out and danced in the sunlight. The kitchen window was particularly dusty, and when I started wiping the pane, I noticed a blur of movement outside. For a second, I thought it was a bird, but then it happened again, and my eyes caught a shadow. It was too big to be a bird. Was that a person? By the way they ducked behind the tree, it was clear their intentions weren't good. A stack of boxes blocked the back door, so I zipped back down the hall to the front door, pushing by Mom. "Bronwyn!" Mom yelled, shock hitching in her throat. I didn't slow down. Every tree looked the same in the wooded yard, but whoever was out there couldn't get far without being seen.
Winnie! Winnie! Are you okay?"
Dad ran to catch up. His breathing was heavy. I tossed a glance over my shoulder. His shirt was soaked with sweat from moving in the heat. I stared back at the trees. "Do we have any neighbors?" I swallowed.
"Unless you count a family of foxes as neighbors, no. There shouldn't be anyone else within a mile of here."
The rows and rows of trees only confirmed what he was saying. I looked back at Dad. Someone was spying on me through my window.
"What?"
Dad furrowed his brows. He took confident strides ahead of me and stopped before the tree line.
"Did you see what they look like?"
I opened my mouth and shut it. I shook my head. No, they hit too fast.
"Did you see if they were holding a weapon?"
No, it was a shadow. It wasn't like I could see any weapons, but some guns were small and easily concealed. What if someone thought the house was abandoned and was casing it for a robbery? Dad stood still.
"Excuse me."
Dad shouted in the direction of the trees.
"Now I'm sure you didn't mean to intrude, but this is private property. Would you mind stepping out and clearing up this misunderstanding?"
His voice was met with a slight breeze, brushing over the tall grass. We both said nothing for a few moments, waiting, guarding.
"You sure it wasn't a deer? Or a raccoon?"
He asked, his voice much lower. "I'm sure it was a person," I whispered back. There was no mistaking it. Dad's shoulders rose and dropped with a deep exhale, and he strode toward the trees. My heart threatened to stop the closer he got to the nearest one. There was one other time when I felt like I was being targeted. After a school dance, I walked home, and someone followed me. They weren't even sneaky about it, simply trailing behind me for several blocks. Part of me felt stupid for letting the walk go on so long. But I could see the guy clearly, and I could point him out in a lineup if I needed to. In the end, I called my dad, and he met me. The guy walked off, appearing to find something better to do than square up with my 240-pound 6-foot father. This time, though, I had no idea who we were dealing with. I could only stare in shock as Dad twisted his body around the tree. I watched his face for any reaction, but he continued checking around the trees until it became dense woods at the back of the property. I slowly exhaled as he walked back to me and plopped a heavy hand on my shoulder.
I didn't see anyone. Maybe you're tired from the long trip.
He gave me a sympathetic smile. I know what I saw, I thought again. But I didn't argue. Instead, I followed Dad inside, ignoring the prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The sun began to set by the time the movers peeled off. Our stuff was nowhere near unpacked, but it was all inside, so we called it a day anyway. The smell of pepperoni pizza drifted through the kitchen and down the hall, beckoning me from the window in the living room. I didn't press the issue with Dad, but I still had the unnerving feeling of being watched. "Your pizza's gonna get cold if you don't eat it soon, Winnie," Mom said, after staring out at the dark woods. The kitchen light was almost blinding. I rubbed my eyes as I sat down at the short end of the kitchen island. But pizza was still hot, so I blew on it before taking a bite.
So,
Dad cleared his throat.
are you ready to start school this week?
I bit back an exasperated groan. Hillwoods High School was only one of 2 high schools in town, and the second one was technically not even in town. It wasn't like I had any choice. "Yeah," I lied. "Why wouldn't I be?"
Well, it's,
I glanced over at Mom, who took the hint. "Back in Bronwyn, swim team was your whole world, and there isn't a swim team here," she said. "But we still want you to take this opportunity to expand your circle." "What circle?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "I don't have any friends here. The circle is basically a dot."
That's not true,
Mom said.
You have your cousin, Anais.
I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. A cousin wasn't a friend, especially not a cousin I hadn't seen in years. While it might have been true that we used to be friends, and that was when we were 10. That one time, she visited and was suddenly secretive about everything. Dad thought it would be a good idea to teach her to swim, but she wouldn't even dip her toe in the shallow end of the community pool. When I dove in and showed her the doggy paddle, she let out a blood-curdling scream, which made everyone feel uncomfortable enough for the lifeguard to kick us out. Even weirder was what happened the night when we were going to bed. She slept on an air mattress, and I slept on my bed with my back to her. I heard her sit up, which I ignored, assuming she was going to go to the bathroom, but she didn't. She just sat there and said the 4 creepiest words I've ever heard. "Why didn't you burn?" I stopped breathing for a moment, too stunned to do or say anything. Really? How was I supposed to answer that? I waited until I heard her lie down and turn over before I exhaled. To this day, I have no idea what prompted those words. I know that even if I asked her, she wouldn't tell me. It was easier to accept we'd never be friends. "She doesn't count," I said, taking another bite of my pizza. "Okay, fine." Mom put up her hands defensively. "Cousin Anais doesn't count, but that means you'll have to try to make friends." "I won't make any promises."
I think Hillwoods does have a pool.
Dad said suddenly.
Or used to.
He had that far-off look, like he wasn't sure if he'd imagined it, but it still gave me a bit of hope.
Yeah, it was part of the rec center. I remember your uncle and I used to try to climb down into it, since it was always drained.
That killed my hope. "So it's closed?" He nodded.
Now that I think about it, the rec center has been shut down for a while, and the pool itself has been closed since before I was born. Sorry.
Fabulous. I rolled my eyes. I didn't speak again for the rest of the dinner. Instead, Dad talked excitedly about driving around town and seeing what stayed the same and what had changed. "Dad, you've been here. Don't you already know?" I asked half-heartedly. I was met with silence. and it forced me to look up.
Well, I've been busy with your grandmother. She's not in town, and I've been going to see her.
You haven't seen Uncle Nathan? I couldn't help the hostility that seeped into my question. Dad had gotten into a fight with Uncle Nathan during one of his visits, like a huge one, practically a fist fight. No one would tell me what it was about, but considering I'd never heard Dad raise his voice, much less see him raise a fist, I knew it was serious. Mom gave him an ultimatum. Either he stayed away, or we all moved in. And here we are. Again, only silence. Mom gave me a pointed look. Like he said, your father's been busy. She gave Dad a pointed look, too, and he forced a smile. So he and Uncle Nathan hadn't made up. Still, they thought Anais and I should be best friends? All right, keep your secrets. I went back to my pizza.
What secrets?
Dad stammered. He was a terrible liar. Mom grabbed his hand and squeezed it. I looked away. I hated moving away from my swim team, my friends, and my entire life at the start of junior year. But it wasn't like the situation was ideal for anyone. Lala was dying. Uncle Nathan and Dad were fighting, and Mom didn't seem to like the house. And she'd never been one for traveling anyway. We all needed to adjust. I looked down at the pizza grease collecting on my plate, and I remembered what Mom promised me before we moved in. Only 1 year. Winnie! Mom's voice pitched up. I shook my head and rubbed my eyes. Sorry, I mumbled. I'm tired. I'm going to bed early. I took a moment to toss the paper plate in the trash before glancing out the kitchen window again. I knew I saw something earlier, but there was no point in bringing it back up. Instead, I forced myself up the stairs and into my bedroom. I drew the blinds on my window, if only to feel safer before plopping into bed. The darkness was only mildly comforting. Every time I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, it was like a bright light shone through my eyelids. But paranoia could keep me awake for only so long. By the time I fell asleep, the only glow I saw came from 2 fireflies that shined like eyes in the dark. Chapter 2. Anais. It was sometime after 1:00 a.m. when I started getting ready. I know this because most of the stuff on television was infomercial after infomercial, with the occasional break for an old family-friendly sitcom rerun that people could only stomach at, 1:00 a.m. And even then, it was only because they were half asleep. It was dark, both inside and outside. The glow of the television matched that of the moonlight, and the house itself had fallen into a quiet sort of rhythm, like the heartbeat of a sleeping animal. I shifted off the couch and pushed the blanket aside. Mom always made sure to cover me from head to toe in the thick quilt, believing that it got drafty at night, and the first floor was chillier than the second. Not that we had AC. Underneath the couch, my running shoes waited side by side. After pulling on socks, I carefully slipped the shoes on and stretched into a standing position. Falling asleep on the couch always made me feel groggy, with some muscle ache. The cushions were permanently out of shape. It wasn't that my own room was unbearable, or that my bed was ridden with bed bugs, rather that the floorboards leading out of my room were incredibly noisy, which was generally unhelpful when I needed to sneak out of the house. Like tonight, the side door was my favorite way out, if only because it was the most hidden. Mom and Dad's windows faced the street, and the neighbors couldn't see much due to a thicket of bushes and low-hanging branches. I closed the screen door, which waved even in the briefest of winds, so I made sure to stick a few bricks in front to hold it shut. The air was cool, brushing the beads of sweat from my forehead and sharpening my senses. At night, most of Hillwoods became what I like to call a blind spot. The rules and rituals did not apply, as if the town itself were asleep and couldn't be bothered to regulate our nightly lives. Not that any of us had much of a nightlife. Still, the road was empty and silent. The shadows and peering eyes were shut away in the dark. For once I could breathe. Putting one foot in front of the other, I headed down the driveway. It was my last chance before everyone realized Bronwyn had moved in and all hell broke loose. I stopped for a moment, thinking I heard a soft chime. The leaves were rustling, but that was it. I swallowed and took a few more steps until I heard it again. Light notes. The words were melodic and hard to decipher. On instinct, I covered my ears. It couldn't be her. Not Sweetie, not now. We didn't start the ritual for another few days. Couldn't she wait until then to wreak havoc? I swallowed and looked around. The trees loomed over me. I couldn't tell where the sound was coming from, only that it kept coming and it was getting closer. It followed me as I trotted ahead, growing louder the farther I walked. Eventually, I set into a brisk run. She was not getting me. Not when I was so close to finding my way out. A short figure leaned out from behind a tree. The darkness rendered them more shadow than person, obscuring every detail of their body. And yet by the sound of their muffled laughter, I knew who it was. My incredibly annoying ex. I exhaled sharply and stomped over to her. "Hannah, what are you doing here?" She threw the question back at me. "What are you doing here, Anais? It's almost 2 a.m. You don't live around here, Hannah. How did you even get to this side of town?" I clenched my fist. "Borrowed my brother's moped. Need a ride? It's around the corner." Seeing that she wasn't going to answer my question, I pushed past her. "I'm fine." The smell of cigarette smoke made my stomach flip, which pissed me off even more. "Hey!" Her hand hovered in midair, as though she were reaching out to me before thinking better of it. "I don't have time for this, Hannah." She put her hands in her pockets. She was wearing an oversized hoodie with track pants that were too large for her. Though her hoodie cloaked her head, I knew she had her hair tied back at the nape of her neck. Seeing her like this made my chest ache and urged me on my path. A few seconds later, Hannah jogged past me. She disappeared around the corner of a house. A moment later, there was the sound of a motor starting, and she reappeared on the back of a large moped. She circled around and stopped a few feet ahead of me. "Hop on," she said. For all the frustration she brought me, it didn't take much convincing to climb behind her. The night was long enough without adding an on-foot trek through the woods. I tried not to lean in too close. Even when she hit the gas, every bump in the road made me rethink my decision. I shut my eyes as the wind became more piercing. Was this her plan? For me to cling on to her like old times, mistaking my racing heart for attraction, rather than an indictment of how fast she was going? "Slow down!" I hissed. She obliged. 20 minutes later, we were at a break in the road. At first glance, it looked like an actual intersection, trees parting to reveal a cobblestone road. It was curious enough to make anyone take a closer look, except the supposed road bled into the forest until it disappeared. There was a reason for that, actually. The road used to be a fully functioning path to the lake, where a bus would pick up and drop off eager residents who were looking to cool off with an afternoon swim. Eventually, whether it was for funding reasons or new property laws, the road was closed. Wildlife reclaimed it, growing over much of the cobblestone like a scab closed over a wound. Hannah parked off to the side. "I didn't know you were inviting yourself along," I said warily. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did you think I was going to leave you out here?" She stood beside me. "Someone's got to bring you back, safe and sound." Who said I wanted to come back? I kept that thought tucked into the back of my head as I turned down the cobblestone road. Fishing out my cell phone, I turned on the flashlight app. The dark was so oppressive here. It was crushing me. The light reminded me to breathe. On both sides of the road, dirt and grass snaked over much of the stone, and I shined the light along the soft border. I squinted in the dark. "The legend said to find the stop." "Why do you keep looking for it?" Hannah interrupted. The bus that used to run to the lake was rumored to still be around. In just about every iteration of the story I could find, a great tragedy struck the bus. It crashed into a tree or ran straight into the lake, killing everyone on board. The tragedy changed faces depending on who you asked. And ever since the crash, at the darkest time of night, a person might hear an engine rumbling, the clip-clopping of people's shoes as they climbed aboard. They say that if a person were to get on the ghost bus, they would never return. No one knew where this ghost bus went, and truthfully, I didn't care. Anywhere was better than Hillwoods. "Are you really going to keep looking out for it?" Hannah grumbled. Her hand gripped my shoulder, using me as her guide. "You can go home if you want, Hannah. I reminded her. No one's forcing you to stay. It was hard to say exactly what went wrong between us. Sometimes, I think it was because she was too abrasive while I was too sensitive. If someone even looked at her wrong, she fought back a hell of a lot more than I ever did, as if to signal she was tough with thick skin and nobody was going to make her feel bad about herself. Maybe it was because Hannah and I were the only two non-white girls in town, and while that made for fun commiseration, it made me wonder if we had anything else in common. Hannah's eyes darted all over the place, and she stuck closer to me than I liked. Wait a minute. Are you scared? I turned to her. I thought you didn't believe in the ghost bus. Shut up, she said a little too quickly. I'm not scared. You're the one with the light. You have a cell phone, too. Unless you left it at home, I pointed out. She didn't answer. Hannah, I didn't leave my cell phone at home. Hannah snapped. Her hand left my shoulder, and I could hear her rustle through her pockets. Her light joined mine. See? Great. Now use the light to get off the path and go home. I went ahead. Anais, wait up! Can't you at least tell me why you're looking for it? Hannah knew well enough about the flickers I got, brief glimpses of the town's ghosts, both people and events. I saw the ghost bus months ago, careening through the trees like smoke, stopping at a non-existent stop and then picking up speed again, when no one boarded. It was a lesser legend of the Hillwoods variety. The ghost bus couldn't hurt you if you didn't go looking for it. Most people knew of it, but didn't know if it was really true. I was one of those people, at least until it came for me. Something's not right about it, I responded. There were rules to Hillwoods and everything in it, and by that logic, the bus should have never deviated from its path. It should have never stopped in front of my house at 8:00 a.m. when I was rushing to be on time for school. Oh, you mean the fact that it's a ghost? She said sardonically. I wheeled around, nearly causing her to collide into me. Hannah, please. If you're not going to be helpful, can you at least be quiet? With my light pointed downward. I couldn't see her expression. I imagined it was stunned, or maybe she rolled her eyes at me. Either way, she was silent. I tried to recreate that morning a few times. I tried wearing the same outfit, being late on the same day of the week. Nothing I did summoned it to me. Eventually, the thought sprouted. What if it needed me? I wasn't a psychic or anything, but something made me think the bus or the town, I wasn't sure which, was trying to tell me something. Maybe if I had swallowed my fear and gotten on the bus when it showed up outside of my house, I'd know what that message was. But I didn't. I turned myself around and gone back inside, deciding to call it a sick day. Tonight was my last shot to find the ghost bus, because starting tomorrow, I'd have to keep an eye on Bronwyn. It was for her own protection. So far, the news of the new resident barely permeated the town, and I was thankful for that. The last thing I wanted was for someone else to be watching her. Hannah and I stumbled through the dark for another hour before calling it. She yawned loudly as she led the way back to her brother's scooter. Every few steps, I glanced back over my shoulder, hoping to catch something. A sign that I was on the right path, or a clue about what I needed to do instead, but nothing so definitive came. Once we were far down the road, a light flickered in the woods. Chapter 3. Bronwyn. My stomach flipped whenever I thought of my first day of school in a new place. It was bad enough being a new kid. It was worse that I was starting a few weeks into the school year. I would stick out, unsure of where to go or who to befriend. Part of me wished I could have been homeschooled for the whole year, but I knew I would never speak to another person outside of my family if that happened. Still, it was tempting. Dad jingled his car keys at the doorway.
Come on, Winnie. Don't want to be late.
Yes, I do. Mom gave me a peck on the cheek before shuttling me to the door. Have a good day. I want to hear all about the friends you've made when you get back. Ha! I rolled my eyes as I walked to the car. I didn't realize it until we were driving to school, but Lala's was on the outskirts of Hillwoods, much further from the town than I expected. The densely populated trees became sparser until I could actually see buildings in the distance. The winding dirt roads turned into paved roads, and there were a few sidewalks that separated street from grass.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?